The morning started like any other, but I could already sense that trouble was brewing in the neighborhood. Living in this HOA-controlled community had been nothing short of a circus. Between the endless rules, the constant nagging about lawn height, and the self-appointed neighborhood Queen Bee Karen, peace was a rare commodity. But this time, the storm wasn't about grass or trash bins. It was about something far more personal, my Harley. Now, my Harley isn't just a bike. It's the kind of machine you polish even when it doesn't need it, the kind you hear roaring before you even see it. I had rebuilt half the engine myself, swapped out the pipes, added a custom paint job with a deep black gloss that shimmered under the sun. To me, it wasn't just metal and rubber, it was freedom. Apparently, that freedom had caught the eye of someone who thought the world owed him everything. Karen's teenage son, Tyler. Spoiled wasn't even the word for him. This kid strutted around like the whole subdivision was his personal kingdom. He had the manners of a crow in a garbage can, and every time I saw him, he was either barking orders at his mother or demanding something new. And like clockwork, his mother always delivered. He wanted the latest game console? Done. A brand new iPhone even though he shattered the last one? Done. Sneakers that cost more than a week's paycheck? Absolutely. But this time, his eyes had locked onto something he couldn't just pick off a store shelf, my Harley Davidson. It started innocently enough. I was out front wiping her down, humming along to some old rock playing in my earbuds, when I noticed Tyler staring. At first, I figured he was just curious, maybe admiring the shine. I gave him a nod, the kind you give a kid when you're half acknowledging their existence. But then he spoke. "Cool bike," he said, with that fake grin teenagers get when they think they're smarter than you. "How much?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Not for sale, kid. This one's mine." That should have been the end of it. But with Tyler, nothing was ever that simple. The next day, he came back, this time with a notepad. I looked it up, he announced proudly, as though he had just uncovered buried treasure. "You could get like 10 grand for this. I'll give you 2. I nearly dropped the rag I was holding. 2? 2 grand. I laughed outright. "Son, the paint job alone cost me that much. Go ride a bicycle." His grin vanished, replaced with the scowl of someone not used to hearing the word no. He huffed, stomped off, and I thought that was the last of it. I was wrong. Later that week, I caught him sitting on the Harley without permission. My blood pressure spiked the second I saw him gripping the handlebars like he owned it. I stormed across the driveway. "Get off. Now." He flinched, hopped off, and tried to play it cool. "Relax, dude. I was just checking it out. It's gonna be mine anyway. My mom says we'll figure something out." That sentence right there set the stage for everything that came after. "We'll figure something out." What he meant was his mom, HOA Karen herself, was about to insert herself into my life in the worst way. See, Karen was the self-elected enforcer of the HOA. She carried a clipboard like it was a badge of honor, walked the neighborhood as if it were her fiefdom, and acted like every house, every yard, every car parked on the street belonged to her. If she didn't like something, she'd whine about property values until the rest of the HOA board caved. And she hated me. Why? Because I didn't roll over. I didn't bow down to her fake authority, didn't pretend her rules carried weight beyond the thin paper they were printed on. And now, with her son's eyes locked on my Harley, I knew she'd crank her meddling up to a whole new level. That evening, just as I was locking up the garage, Karen strutted across the cul-de-sac like a lawyer walking into court. Her heels clicked against the pavement, her sunglasses perched high, and of course, clipboard in hand. Tyler trailed behind her, smirking like he already won. "Evening," I said flatly, already knowing where this was headed. Karen didn't waste time. "We need to discuss that motorcycle." "No, we don't," I replied, trying to shut it down before it started. "Yes, we do," she insisted, flipping through her papers as if she had a legal argument prepared. "Motorcycles are loud, dangerous, and frankly lower the overall appearance of the neighborhood. Several residents have complained." I folded my arms. Funny, because I've never heard a word from anyone else. Just you. And for the record, it's parked in my driveway, not the HOA's. She gave a tight smile. "Tyler has taken a liking to it. He's very responsible, you know. I think it would be better for everyone if you sold it to him." It would solve the noise issue and give him something productive to do. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me to sell my Harley to your son to make the neighborhood quieter? Exactly. She smiled like she'd just solved world hunger. I laughed, long, loud, and probably too much. Lady, that's never happening. Tyler's face turned red. You'll regret this, he muttered. Karen straightened her sunglasses, her expression sharpening into something colder. We'll see. And with that, she turned and walked away, clipboard tucked under her arm like a loaded weapon. Tyler followed, but not before glaring at me with the kind of look that promised payback. I knew they were cooking something up. What I didn't know was just how far Karen was willing to go, or that soon, cops would be knocking at my door while I was in the middle of briefing the state attorney. This was only the beginning. If there was one thing I had learned about Karen over the years, it was this: she never let anything go. Once she had her claws in a situation, she would keep scratching until she either got her way or left everyone around her bleeding from the frustration. After our little discussion about the Harley, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd move on. But by the next morning, I had a brand new HOA violation notice taped to my mailbox. Unauthorized vehicle. Motorcycle not permitted in driveway. Must be stored out of sight or removed from property. I almost laughed. The HOA bylaws didn't mention motorcycles anywhere. Cars, RVs, boats, yes, but motorcycles? Not a word. This was Karen's handiwork, no doubt. She was trying to rewrite the rules just for me. I crumpled the notice and tossed it straight into the trash. By noon, I got an email from the HOA board requesting my presence at their next meeting to discuss compliance issues. I didn't even have to open the email to know whose fingerprints were all over it. And sure enough, that evening, Tyler strutted past my driveway again, this time tossing a smug comment over his shoulder. Better sell it to me before Mom makes you. I shook my head, trying not to let him get under my skin. But the way Karen was operating, I knew he wasn't just bragging. He genuinely believed she could make it happen. The following week turned into a full-blown campaign against me. First, Karen filed noise complaints every time I started the Harley, even though I only rode it on weekends. Then, she convinced a couple of her cronies on the board to survey the neighborhood, stopping by other houses to ask leading questions like, "Don't you think motorcycles make the street unsafe?" One neighbor even told me she offered them free landscaping services through Tyler's half-baked yard business if they backed her complaints. It was laughable, but also exhausting. The HOA board was small, and Karen had already wormed her way into half of their ears. One night, I overheard Tyler bragging to a group of his friends outside. "Yeah, it's just a matter of time. Mom says he won't have a choice. She's talking to the cops about how it's a nuisance. Once they get involved, the bike's mine." That was the first time I realized how far Karen might be willing to go. And then came the breaking point. It was a Tuesday morning, and I had an important briefing scheduled with the state attorney's office downtown. I'd been preparing for it all week, laying out reports, witness statements, and case details that needed to be presented with absolute precision. I worked as an investigator, and these briefings weren't just casual meetings. They were make-or-break moments for cases, sometimes for people's lives. As I stood in front of the conference table, going over the evidence with the attorney and their team, my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. But then it buzzed again. And again. And again. Finally, during a short break, I checked my messages. 3 missed calls. 2 voicemails. 1 text that made my blood run cold. "Police are at your house. Says you're in violation of HOA rules and have an unregistered vehicle. Your neighbor Karen filed the complaint." I nearly crushed the phone in my hand. She actually did it. She called the cops over a motorcycle parked in my driveway. When I listened to the voicemail, my suspicion was confirmed. The officer's tone was polite but firm. "Sir, this is Officer Daniels with the county police. We've had a complaint regarding your property and need you to call us back immediately. If you are available, please return home so we can resolve the issue." I knew exactly what had happened. Karen, with her endless scheming, had spun some story about my Harley being dangerous, illegal, or God knows what else. And she'd done it while I was busy briefing the state attorney. It wasn't just petty anymore. It was sabotage. I excused myself from the meeting, explained the situation briefly, and promised to return once I dealt with it. The attorney gave me a sharp nod, clearly unimpressed that neighborhood drama was pulling me away. I could feel my professional reputation teetering, and that made me angrier than anything else. By the time I pulled into my driveway, 2 squad cars were already parked at the curb. Their flashing lights painted the street red and blue, and of course, half the neighborhood was gathered around like it was some kind of free reality show. And who was standing at the center of it all, arms crossed, grinning like she'd just won the lottery? Karen. And right next to her, Tyler, looking at my Harley as if it were already gift-wrapped for him. The sight of 2 patrol cars sitting outside my house was bad enough. But the crowd of neighbors milling around like it was the 4th of July parade made my blood boil. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a performance. And Karen was the director. As I parked and got out of my car, Karen immediately pounced, her voice loud enough for everyone within a 2-block radius to hear. There he is. That's the man I told you about. He's been keeping an unregistered, dangerous motorcycle on his property, disturbing the peace, and refusing to comply with HOA regulations. I froze, staring at her with disbelief. She said it with such conviction you'd think she was reciting scripture. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm demeanor, held up a hand. "Sir, can we talk to you for a moment?" "Of course," I said, keeping my tone level even though inside I was seething. "But let's get something clear right away. There is nothing illegal about that Harley." Karen scoffed, flipping her clipboard open like she was about to cite chapter and verse. "It's not about a legal officer. It's about compliance. The HOA clearly states that motorcycles cannot be kept in driveways. It's a violation, plain and simple, and he's been warned multiple times." "Warned?" I barked out a laugh. "You mean those made-up notices you taped to my mailbox? The bylaws don't say a word about motorcycles." "Not one." The shorter officer stepped closer, squinting at Karen's paperwork. "Ma'am, is this official HOA documentation or just your own notes?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "It's a draft. The board is working on updating the rules. But in the meantime, the spirit of the law should be respected. This man is lowering property values." I crossed my arms. So now it's about the spirit of rules that don't exist? Give me a break. The tall officer turned to me. "Do you have registration and insurance for the motorcycle, sir?" "Of course," I replied. I pulled out my wallet, retrieved the papers, and handed them over. Both officers looked them over carefully. Everything was current and spotless. The shorter officer handed them back with a nod. "Everything checks out." Karen's voice rose an octave. "What about the noise? You can hear that thing 3 streets over when he rides it. Isn't that disturbing the peace?" I raised an eyebrow. "I ride it maybe twice a week during the day. I'm not out here revving the engine at midnight. And no one else has ever complained, just you." That's when Tyler finally jumped in, unable to hold his tongue. "Look, dude, stop pretending. Just sell me the bike and all this goes away. Mom already promised I could have it once the cops made you get rid of it." The entire street went silent. The officers turned slowly to look at Tyler, then at Karen. Karen's face turned beet red, and for once, she was at a loss for words. "Tyler, not now." "But," he cut her off. "Why not? You said it. You said we'd take care of it, and then I could ride it to school. What's the big deal? Just hand it over already." One of the officers stifled a laugh. The tall one cleared his throat and looked back at me. "Sir, I think I understand what's happening here." "Glad we're on the same page," I muttered. Karen tried to backpedal, her voice rising with desperation. "This isn't about my son. This is about community standards, safety, and values." The tall officer shook his head. "Ma'am, I think this has more to do with personal interests than with safety. We've verified the motorcycle is legal, insured, and properly registered. There's no violation here." Karen opened her mouth to argue again, but the shorter officer cut her off this time. "And unless your HOA has filed updated bylaws with the county, these notices aren't enforceable. You can't invent rules just because you don't like someone's property." The crowd murmured, some neighbors exchanging looks of amusement. For the first time, I could see Karen's perfect little image cracking. Tyler, however, was still glaring at me like I'd robbed him. "You'll regret this," he hissed under his breath. I leaned down slightly, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "Kid, the only thing I regret is letting you get within 10 feet of my Harley." The officers gave me a nod. "We're sorry for the disturbance, sir. We'll make a note of this incident in our report, but as far as we're concerned, you're in the clear." Karen's voice came shrill, desperate. "So you're just going to let him keep breaking the rules?" The tall officer's patience finally snapped. "Ma'am, there are no rules being broken here. If you continue to waste police resources on personal disputes, we'll have to consider this harassment." The crowd erupted in whispers. A few neighbors even chuckled. Karen's face drained of color, her power play unraveling right before her eyes. I turned back toward the garage, gesturing at the Harley gleaming under the sunlight. "She's not going anywhere," I said firmly. "And if anyone touches her without my permission again, we'll have a real legal issue on our hands." The officers nodded one last time before heading back to their cars. Slowly, the crowd dispersed, some shaking their heads, others smirking as Karen stood frozen, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. For the first time in years, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood had been publicly humiliated, and I had the feeling this was far from over. When the police cars finally pulled away, the street felt oddly quiet, like the calm after a thunderstorm. The crowd of neighbors had mostly dispersed, but not without throwing me a few thumbs-ups or sympathetic nods. Some even whispered things like, "About time someone stood up to her." Karen, however, stood rooted to the sidewalk. Her clipboard hung loosely at her side now, the weapon she had wielded so confidently reduced to nothing more than a useless piece of plastic. Her sunglasses, once a shield of superiority, now looked more like a mask for humiliation. And then there was Tyler. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't humbled. He was furious. His face was red, his fists clenched, and the way he glared at me you'd think I had stolen his inheritance. "This is BS, he shouted suddenly, kicking at the curb. "You're just some old loser with a loud bike. You don't deserve it. That Harley should have been mine." Neighbors turned back, some gasping, others smirking at his meltdown. Karen hissed at him to stop, but he was too far gone. "You promised," Tyler yelled at his mother. "You said we'd get it. You said you'd take care of it. You lied." The words echoed down the cul-de-sac, bouncing off manicured lawns and polished cars. Karen's face turned pale as marble. For once, her own son had exposed her scheme in front of everyone. I folded my arms, leaning casually against my car, letting the moment play out. I didn't need to say a word. Tyler was doing all the damage himself. Finally, when his tantrum reached the point where he tried to kick the Harley's tire, I stepped forward. My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made him freeze mid-motion. "Touch that bike again, kid, and I'll file charges myself. You've been warned." His eyes widened. For the first time all evening, he seemed to understand that this wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This could get very real. Karen grabbed him by the arm, her voice sharp but trembling. "That's enough, Tyler. Inside. Now." He jerked away but eventually stormed off toward their house, muttering curses under his breath. Karen lingered, though, clearly unwilling to accept total defeat. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and tried one last time to salvage her authority. "You may have gotten away with it this time," she said, her voice brittle. "But the HOA will not forget this. I'll see to it personally that new bylaws are drafted. This isn't over." I smiled, slow and deliberate, before delivering the knockout blow. "Go ahead. Draft whatever you want. I'll be forwarding every notice you send straight to the state attorney's office. In fact, they already know about today's stunt, since I had to leave their meeting to deal with your nonsense. If you think harassing me with fake rules will end well for you, by all means, try." Her jaw dropped slightly, the words hitting her like a slap. She hadn't realized I was briefing the state attorney when she sent the cops. Now, she understood just how badly she had overplayed her hand. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back toward her house, dragging her pride behind her like a shredded banner. The aftermath. The days that followed were strangely peaceful. No more fake violation notices appeared in my mailbox. No more noise complaints were filed. The HOA board, clearly tired of being dragged into Karen's vendettas, suddenly stopped requesting my presence at their meetings. Word had spread quickly after the police visit. Neighbors who once stayed quiet started giving me nods of approval, even small smiles, whenever I passed. A few even muttered things like, "Good for you," or "She had it coming." Tyler, meanwhile, avoided me entirely. His swagger was gone, replaced with sulking silence. Sometimes I'd catch him peeking out from behind their curtains, glaring at my Harley, but he never dared step near it again. As for Karen, her power in the neighborhood was shattered. The clipboard still appeared from time to time, but the authority behind it had vanished. Everyone knew now that her crusades weren't about community standards. They were about personal grudges and her spoiled son's demands. The irony? A few weeks later, the HOA actually held a vote to discuss potential new bylaws. The majority of the neighborhood shot down Karen's proposals without hesitation. Not only did she fail to ban motorcycles, she lost her credibility entirely. I, on the other hand, kept riding my Harley. Every Saturday morning, I'd fire it up, let the engine purr, and take it for a spin down the open road. The sound that once drove Karen mad now seemed to serve as a reminder to the neighborhood. Some battles just aren't worth fighting. And deep down, I think Karen knew she'd picked the wrong one.